So on my list, it says next is why I'm right, and then citizens audit. But I know that's wrong because I wrote why I'm right after citizens audit, after that project crashed and failed. So I'm going to change it on the website. In case I don't, I'm documenting it here. I'm going to read citizens audit first. Citizens audit is what I called my love of the play of language. That it's funny, citizens audit has CA just like California. So that was going to be my movement, a citizens audit. And then I would inspire other people to audit their government. If I believe that we don't have to have the solution in order to start affecting change, we just have to identify the ways that the system's corrupt. And then we start have to taking the bottlenecks off the democracy. So I believe that the people are inherently good, and I believe that democratic civics and discussions inherently bring out the truth if we're just allowed to talk. And so all we have to do is free up our democracy, and then we'll start, that's idealistic, I guess, to solve our problems, start wiping our own ass. So if you're going to go into a campaign without many strongly held beliefs other than that of civic discussion and democracy, then the safe place to start is just by saying, let's just have an audit. Let's open up the books. I was starting to get into the Fed and how bullshit the Fed is. There's just more and more layers of how the bullshit in which we're living. So, wow, the Fed is not federal? Oh my gosh. This is just a private corporation? So corporations really are winning the war. 2010, remember, they just had Citizens United, where corporations are allowed to spend unlimited amounts on campaigns. So if you believe that everything's a positive and negative, this is the same time that Satoshi creates Bitcoin, around the same time. He creates it a year before Citizens United in 2009. So just as soon as the same time that corporations become all powerful, we just had a guy invent a way to go around the financial system. So corporations have the ability to spend unlimited amounts in campaigns, which is a response to which. Now all of a sudden campaigns are, who cares how much campaign funds you have, because you can just funnel the money through Bitcoin, which that's, when you talk about the power of Bitcoin, it's a power to subvert traditional financial institutions, to lessen their stranglehold on the world around us. That might be why Bitcoin itself now is a front in the war of control over peoples. That there's a lot of this institutional power and money going into Bitcoin. And is it truly a market that can't be manipulated? Or at this stage at least, maybe it still could be manipulated. That's above my pay grade. But I know where to find those answers. I have some good resources, emailing lists on the latest in Bitcoin. I just have to dig into those emails and catch up on that discussion. So didn't know about Bitcoin here. Didn't hear about it for the next couple of years. Citizens Audit, January 18th. So I'm going to read this and then I'll comment on it. So this is my notes from the videos. I took a couple dozen videos, and then we had a really nice long break of about 5 days in this guy's house. Forgot where. One of those couch surfing where he had decent internet. So I uploaded all the videos to YouTube, holding them hostage. Now I'm still waiting for YouTube to get back to me on when they're going to release my intellectual property. I'm not too worried right now because the more I put effort in selling my intellectual property, the more I prove it has value. And once I prove it has value, now I have monetary damages I could go after them for. So I'm just going to keep on my grind and prove that my intellectual property has value. But once I have a number to attach to it, then I can hire a decent lawyer to go and get it freed up from YouTube, so that way I don't just get the videos back, but I get damages. That would be nice. So I'm sure most of the stuff I've dealt with these technology companies, I'm not the only person dealing with it. So when I do that fight against YouTube, it'll be on behalf of all the people that they're fucking over. But these companies, I could just back of the envelope calculating that if I'm one person they're fucking over, it's other people. It's because they've scaled up too fast. They haven't scaled up the proportionate amount of customer service to deal with this type of stuff. And they don't have the right values anyways. They're not aligned with the internet's own values. There's certain values by which technology operates with. And it's very Taoist, very Zen way. Because this is just how the pattern of life operates. And as technology becomes more efficient, it starts aligning more and more with the pattern of life. The pattern of infinity. Data that might as well be infinity. Once you start scaling up certain technologies, you start having to deal with concepts of infinity, or at least data beyond human comprehension. Now, I think a lot of more Eastern ethics are going to be helpful. What does that mean? Programming by Eastern ethics? It's less about the applications and more about the person keeping their head in the right space to ask the right questions and solve problems with the right mentality. So I think inherently an Eastern mentality that comes from Taoist, Buddhist, Zen principles. Buddhism met Tao, became Zen. The patriarchs that came out of the West into the East were cross-pollinated with different ideas as they went east. And by the time Zen was formulated, Cha-en, Cha-an, however you say it, it's just meditation. It's a form of Buddhism, but it's a form of stilling the mind to keep you calm that I believe gets you in the best flow for problem solving and art creation and high performance for athletes. And that's why Zen doesn't propagate itself. It's propagated by its practitioners and belief systems. Having no real dogma. It's not supposed to. Who are you proposing? You're not really worshiping God or Jesus or prophets. There is that stuff, and there's a history to it. But it's more of a mental state, and it's such a useful mental state that people propagate it. So everything you see about Zen and other stuff, usually it's just people propagating a mental state that they found is beneficial to them. Zen workout, Zen yoga. I had a friend who opened up a Zen hostel. These guys aren't getting together with each other and saying, oh, let's all worship Zen Jesus. They're saying that if you could get your mind in this flow state, it's very useful for this athletic pursuit or this feng shui for my hostel. So I've always liked it just because the energy felt good. But anyways, I believe that technology is, that type of peace is required to solve some of the biggest problems. If you don't have that type of peace, you run into shit that frustrates you really quickly. I was finding out on this I never learned how to build a website back then. So I was on the road. My name wasn't changed to Shaz legally. So I'm introducing myself as Shaz to people, but I'm so idealistic and intellectually pure, I try to be, that kind of is bugging me that every time I introduce myself to someone, it's not an official name. After I change myself, that's also hard for me when I'm meeting girls or when I'm meeting anyone. It's, oh, my name is David. I didn't feel like a David. I felt like a Shaz for a good 5 years by the time I'm doing this. But still, legally, my ID says David. Legally, my ID saying Shaz just is like foundation. I'm like living my values. So that's, when I did that, that was a very big relief to actually finally be living this persona that for so many years I've been living, or to have it legal. So I'm doing that. I'm also don't have a website. When people are like, you should have a website, I'm like, I know, I'm learning it, but I'm too much on my plate. I'm living out of the car with Shah. When we're at a coffee shop, I'm trying to learn how to build a website, Googling, learning about WordPress. It took me a good year or two, like a year at least, 6 months to a year to at least get a website up. And then every website I build is better than the last. And I'm still by no means the best programmer, but I'm like a journeyman website builder now. I have like a good 8 years off and on. Just every time I need a new project, that's my portfolio. My portfolio are my personal projects. Every time I need a new one, I do it in a different way. I'm not the person I would hire to do the job. I would hire someone a lot better than me. But luckily, I know enough to Mickey Mouse stuff together for anything I needed. When I got into real estate, I knew, well, shit, if the skill set I've learned trying to sell my own writing is actually applicable, I have these different hats I can wear. So I was able to start a corporation and a real estate company because I knew starting a business for my folks had an insurance agency and also brokering real estate, very similar to brokering insurance, connecting risk to an appetite for risk, connecting a landlord or a tenant to a landlord with an appetite for that certain type of tenant. Good at paperwork, not intimidated by the corporate paperwork, having helped people start corporations before, and then also being able to throw up just little websites. I could one-man shop it and do everything. But this is the beginning of that skill set. So that's also why you follow your ideals, because even though I didn't sell this book and I didn't change the name, and after, I think by my birthday around March, me and Shah got in a fight. She's like, we're just using her mom's money at that point, just going back to her every couple days or a week for another loan. And Shah's this crazy story, and he's going to have $10,000, $15,000 just in a month, in 2 months. I wasn't even pitching the book. I wasn't doing it maturely as far as like what I'm trying to do here, where I'm actually going to pitch agents and publishers. I didn't even have a website where people can find me. I wasn't posting every day. But at one point, I sat down for a week in this person's house, and I at least went over the videos myself, and I wrote because even if I lost the videos and even if I didn't sell the book, I knew I wanted, if I have any value at all in life that I've learned so far, it's that I could put the words together. That's how I got Shaw in the first place. She walked down that street, just like this girl. I guess my first impressions usually are a little bit much, but she walked, which tells me if I wanted to keep this girl in my life, I better send her a sweet email. But I'm not in the pursuit mode right now. But Shaw walked down the street, and I knew that she wasn't gonna. I was like in my mind, just knowing people from sales when they bullshit you. We had a really nice goodbye and stuff, but she walked down the street and she took a left and she didn't look back. And in my mind, I was like, if she looks back, then I got her. But she just walked. It was a long block, and then she took a left, and I watched her the whole way, and then she never looked back. And I thought, no, she is not my girl right now. But then I spent that day thinking about it, and I wrote her that email, and I really touched her heart, and she saw something pure and worthwhile in me. But that's how a woman is, a good woman, is they have their standards, and if you don't show that you're worth their love, they have options. Yeah. And so, yeah, this one this week, if I really wanted to get her, I would have had to show that I was with her love more. Or even if it was just a hookup, I would have just had to shut up and just like start like, I've done that before in Puerto Rico. That was like, sometimes you have these ideas in your head. What if I did this? And then you do it and you're like, oh shit, I should have probably learned that move a while ago. I was in Puerto Rico once with this girl, and we're driving through the jungle into like just crazy trees, small little road. It just looks all green around you. The moon's out, so everything's flooded in this great light. We stop in the middle of this jungle landscape. We get out of the car and you just see old buildings maybe, or rocks. You don't even know what it is because the trees and everything is covered in vines. So everything's green and viney, but then up to the trees and up to whatever the things are being covered. And we had driven into the wilderness and just stopped on some dirt road, and everything's covered in a moonlight and just a glow. And we're both just amazed. Of course, she got to that island because she loved nature and that, and she's having her own adventure. And she was on my tour earlier that day, and then she gave me her number by the end of the tour. And on the tour, I'd snuck in some beers, and I gave her a beer, and she's kind of smirked and drank it with me, so I knew she was like cool. And instead of doing the snorkeling, she sat with me on the beach to watch the people. So I kind of knew that. And then afterwards, she gave me her number, so we went to a bar. So things are escalating. It's like, I was an idiot, but when I went to Puerto Rico after this relationship, that's what I chose, not to be with her for the rest of my life, and instead just continue sowing my wild oats. So after this ends and this political thing ends, I go to Puerto Rico, and that's why I really opened up sexually, where, all right, that girl's cute, let me try to get her. Or like, all right, there's a little bit of a vibe, let me go with this. There's like the dance, like starting to like just notice where your partners are in the world and when you run across each other. Even if you think that you're a most reclusive, shy person, someone's giving you an indicator somewhere in your life probably. If you're living life and interacting with people, you're running across people. And some of those people are very lonely. Yeah, there's a lot of lonely people in the world. So there's a lot of unnecessary loneliness. Where are your people? They're out there. Just live your life. Live a full life. And you should run across 10, 15 dateable people a week. So she, this girl, yeah, idiot indicators, but she was, we're in the jungle forest, and she's just looking at everything, and it's full moon, so I just come up behind her and I grab her around. She's tiny. She's a small little girl. And that helps me with the drug girl, because the drug girl was really small and petite. So once you're with that type of body type, you're like, all right, some of my curiosity was like even being with you. So now I'm with that type of person. That's not a curiosity anymore. Take these things off the table. Once you're with enough different types of body types, you're like, all right, I'm with the girl who I could pick up. This is interesting. It makes me feel like a man. And then, I mean, my appetite in porn now is so all over the place. It's like sometimes you're fantasizing about big girls. You're like, there's something nice to like having a lot of meat in your hand, a lot of just like a big thigh, like a slab of just like you just grab it, and there's just a lot of flesh there. This is amusing to probably only myself and no one else. Okay, so this tiny little girl, and we're in the jungle, and I come around her, and I'm just feeling like I should escalate this. This is too beautiful for me to not make this moment something. So I come and I grab her around the shoulders, so like my arms are around her neck, And then she turns around, smiling the biggest smile, and she jumps into my arms. And then I grab her because she's tiny like that. And she starts making out with me. And in between kisses, I'm like, I should have, still trying to analyze, learning to turn that side of my brain off. But in between kisses, I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm making out. I should have, making out, done that a lot sooner and making out. And she just laughs. But I'm like, yeah, no, you had given me enough indications up to that point that you start to realize that once you get enough indications, just allow an awkward moment to happen where you're both staring at each other and then someone has to lean in for a kiss. Or like this guy told me in high school once. I had male friends who could have shown me the right direction if I was more outgoing, I guess, and not so introverted. But he told me on his first date with his girl, he told her she had something in her eye, and then he leaned in to blow it out, like, oh, you have an eyelash in your eye. And then he just leaned in and kissed her. Stupid stuff like that. You got to break that barrier. And if you don't, that's what I have to think back this weekend with this one girl. Maybe there was a time I should have just shut up and kissed her or done something intimate, but I was so cerebral talking about my project to her, to finally an adult. Oh, this is what I've been doing for the last month or two. And then being high for the first time in a month. I probably missed a couple indicators where she just kind of probably wanted me to shut up and kiss her or do something. Yeah, she's probably... Sometimes a girl gets that shut up and kiss me feeling that if you don't, you kind of like... You're like a knotted... Especially a girl who likes stuff non-verbally. Some girls want everything laid out. And to be very clear on how you approach me. Some girls just want to be grabbed. And this girl, she gave me an indication of that when we were in the bed. And I was starting to do that. When we were like, before we went to look for the hot springs, I was on top of her kind of. And it was more like innocent cuddling and being enough with people platonically. Like we kind of like, not really like touching her breasts or her genitals, but we're just like kind of like being like hippies and cuddling each other. Very safe stuff. But I was like kind of like about to like be in a position where I'd be on top of her and she's under me. And my legs in between her thighs. So, and then, and I can actually like look at her face to face and kiss her. And I was like kind of avoiding that. Like I was like on the side and I was about to get up. I kind of put my body on her and I kind of put my leg over her. And now if I put some more pressure where my thigh would go into her leg and I kind of like rub up against her crotch. And if I kind of like pressed into her chest and then came up and looked at her, there'd be like either like distance or into it. Like we're both like safely cuddling from the side. We're tired from the drive and we're just like taking a nap with each other. But as I get up and I asked her, I was like, you mind if we cuddle and we sleep? She was like, no. And so and that's another indication. It's like, I've had sometimes where I just assume, yeah, we could just like lay and hold each other, but sometimes that could be weird. So you want to make sure everything's kind of on the same footing, but then do that without being too verbal, and then it's not. I was about to do some sort of like, we stare at each other and then like kind of lean in, and I've had the girl turn away and not kiss me too, and then it's like, that's not necessarily a bad thing either. It could be coy too, but she said something like, we're not just gonna lay here and have sex all day, and that's not that we're not gonna have sex, but for me, I laughed. I was like, oh yeah, of course we have to go do stuff. But the door was open. That wasn't a like, we're not going to hook up. I don't know, or maybe I misheard and that was just her way of saying like, I'm not trying to hook you up with you on this one Tinder date. So, because that's interesting, meet someone for the first time, go to Slab City and spend the night. That takes a lot of trust on her part and my part, but we both knew that each other were cool. I think she just thought I was too much of a dork and I was just too much into my own project. But yeah, then I thought the door was open. Why did I bring that up? Something else too. I was gonna say that, because I'm processing the most recent thing that happened to me. This is funny, as opposed to the past, which was what I should be doing. But this is a part of my sexuality too. My sexual philosophy is, oh yeah, another time where I mentioned I was teasing something about family or something and guys, and I was like, oh, try to be a gentleman. And she said, oh, no, my gentlemen aren't my type. And I was like, it was one of those little comments I didn't really like say that I noticed. But in my mind, I was like, oh, yeah, I should have been more aggressive. She's that type of girl. Because I try to act like, oh, no, sorry, just trying to be a gentleman. She's like, I don't go for gentlemen. And I've been with enough girls and know enough to kind of like get the vibe like, oh yeah, no, you would have, like, I would have had to initiate. And then in the car later, she says, no, I'm pretty good at initiating stuff. So I think I told her that. I said, yeah, you're a little bit hard to read sometimes. Not in a bad way, just like, I was trying to let her know, like, I would have been a little bit more forward, but us just meeting each other, this is probably a safer way to play it. But when she hit me with that, I'm not a gentleman line, I was like, maybe, yeah, probably if I wanted this to be physical, it would have been one of those, like, kind of just like lay on your body and push into you, and then you'll tell me no. But I had an experience recently. Well, we were both we weren't drunk. At that point, we were sober. But I had an experience recently where, this last year, where there's this drunk girl I thought was hitting on me, and we started cuddling, and then I think she got uncomfortable afterwards, and I'm like, so you want to make sure you're kind of that whole, if you like doing stuff non-verbally, you want to make sure there's enough indications that you're on the same page so people don't feel uncomfortable. Number one is to not make people feel uncomfortable. So, but people feel uncomfortable from blue balls or being horny and not having an outlet too. So there is no hard one way. But yeah, it's a dance. Learn how to dance. Try not to step on each other's toes. It's not an excuse to act rapey, right? But adults honestly communicating with each other should be able to figure it out. And there's honest communication that's not always verbal. It's just like if you're cuddling with someone, you're probably kind of asking for an escalation, unless you set those clear boundaries that the guy's going to try a little bit more, unless from the beginning just cuddling, nothing else. Yeah. So I didn't really try anything past that though, because I don't know. I think I was being a little snobby, and she was too. We were both like, who is this person? That's the problem with Tinder. It's so informal way to meet that, anyways, I don't know. Let's talk about this. Shaz, you had enough exploration of your sexual side this weekend, and you had a great time with an amazing person, and she showed you some really cool shit and expanded your mind, and hopefully you expanded yours through all your fucking blabbering. And that's enough of that. Now you're on your project. Citizens Audit, January 18th, Crescent City. This is the wisdom you gathered when you're with Shah traveling around California. Another woman who opened up your heart and you actually had a relationship with, and that allowed you to accomplish great things because the female energy seems to be a muse in your life. I like it when you talk to yourself like this, Shaz. Maybe you can be your own advice giver. Shaz, it's time to read and not talk so much. Shaz. That's what one of our roommates would call me. Me and Shah, we would joke around. He would be like, Shaz. And then he'd start talking about his life. Shaz, it's just da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Shaz, I used to work for Rolling Stone, blah, 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 blah. Shaz. And so sometimes she would go to me and she'd be like, Shaz, and start telling me something. Citizens Audit, January 18th, 2010, Crescent City, Redwood Hostel. Alicia and I hit the road the week of January 15th. Just outside Crescent City, we stopped to check out Redwood Hostel. I noted a print on the wall describing the logging industry in the area, and Ryan, the desk clerk, was kind enough to read me his children's book. We also had some interesting conversations with some of the guests about politics, good practice for the trip. I got into a heated discussion with a Vietnam War veteran about rationality of pursuing a war with yet another noun, this time the ephemeral threat of terror. I talked to a young guy from the East Coast who was on his way to work on a 200-acre organic farm outside Davis, and I watched a group of visitors play a Galaxy-themed Monopoly game like they were extended family, complete with threats to quit because no one ever really finishes a full game of Monopoly. An interesting conversation ensued between the adults about Crescent City. Apparently, some of them had driven through the town and described it like a ghost town. They talked about how it might be due to poor planning and the aftermath of a devastating flood in the 60s. I had a suspicion that there was more to the story that had something to do with the boom and bust of the logging industry. Before everyone retired for the night, Ryan offered the group office supplies from the hostel. They were being shut down after Sunday. The building needed retrofitting, and there was a lack of funding. A couple teachers in the group clamored over sticky notes Apparently, these are hot commodities when you have to pay for extra classroom supplies out of your pocket. We went to sleep that Sunday night, excited about our adventure. I had a lead on an author whose book I just read and hoped to interview. Plus, who was that guy? That was the guy who wrote, He wrote Walking on Water and some other stuff. He's an environmentalist, radical environmentalist. But he believes that violence is justified to save the, I don't know. I don't vibe with him completely. And he got kind of, I guess I was too, like me traveling around prison, asking people questions. Me politically trying to ask people if I can interview them. They probably thought I was a narc or something. Yeah, and that's the problem with associating yourself with violence is all of a sudden you have to look over your shoulder because the consequences of your actions are going to be catching up with you at any time. Plus, I already had some clues as to what was going on in Crescent City. We definitely wouldn't do any one city justice in a day, but patterns should emerge over the course of the trip. And Monday was the beginning of the story. Yeah, patterns should emerge over the course of the trip. That's what I'm doing right here too. Just stake a position in time and then just observe. And then stake another position in time, and now you have that whole swath of life experience to just delve into. As long as you can record it, dig out patterns, that's the beginning of the scientific process. You observe data, you start having some hypotheses of why stuff happened, and then test those in a repeatable way. And now we have the scientific method and truth, objective, verified truth. Getting started. I'm not going to comment as much or else I'm going to run out of time because this is only going to the 26th. Taking off my glasses for this one. Feeling like this one should be a no glasses one. Here we go. Our day began at the Good Harvest Cafe, a restaurant across from the harbor with exposed wood and Indian art adorning the walls. We did our best young, intrepid reporters impersonations, with laptops set up between coffee cups and eggs Florentine. But where was the story? What was Crescent City all about? I began by delegating a couple tasks to Elise. I have her name in here. Let's just ignore that name and pretend like you can't see it. While she researched local politicians and places of interest, I would catch up on the local news. There was a write-up about a local hero, a mixed martial arts fighter managed by a guy who owned a local cannabis club. That sounded interesting. I found out that there are 3 medical marijuana collectives in Del Norte County. There was also a couple insightful quotes by a county law enforcement. But the weed story seemed too easy. Shah sent me an email overflowing with good information. City hall contacts, real estate highs and lows, schools, churches, and local artists. Plus, there was a Supermax state prison just outside town. It could have filled a week's itinerary and was more than enough to get us started. We decided to hit up the artists first and try to end up at the prison before nightfall. Martial arts. The first stop was a warehouse surrounded by amazing wood sculptures. For a first interview, it didn't go too bad. That interview took a lot of balls to all right, I'm doing this. I'm walking up to strangers in California and be like, running for governor, tell me what you have to say. But yeah, it was actually that interview. We found out people, if you just ask them their opinion, are dying to engage in civics. Also, what I found out on Occupy Wall Street, we're like battered children, being told we're wrong so long that once someone actually believes in you and wants to comfort you and give you a little love and support, it's healing. Anyways, Marshall was really accommodating and had an interesting story. The sound was bad, the conversation rambling, but someone wanted to talk to us. He gave us insight on simpler times, when it was just a one-stoplight town, and he had just come here to help build cement breakers at the mouth of the bay. He said that he had stayed for the quality of life, but admitted that lately it had been tough. If you can hear in the video, he talks about how years ago he sold more art with half the inventory. He was planning on retiring, but a potential buyer was having problems securing financing. Shah and I thanked him for his time and poked around the store. Maybe if the book idea takes off, we'll be hauling off one of these life-size redwood grizzly bears to a loft in San Francisco someday. It was already getting into the afternoon, but we felt proud enough to pat ourselves on the back. Shah was officially a videographer, and I was officially a reporter, candidate, organizer, whatever it was I was doing, I'd just done it. The Bookcomber. Our next lead was a coffee shop / bookstore named The Bookcomber. Shah and I poked around the store and finally purchased a songbook by Ray LaMontagne, before we had enough courage to ask for an interview. Patty didn't want to. Yeah, that's us. Just like the same with sales. You know, you have to pitch these guys on ads when I worked for the East Bay Express, but you poke around their store for like 15 minutes, building up the courage to talk to an owner. Patty didn't want to do anything on camera, but recommended her brother Dale. Turns out Dale had a lot to say, and we spent the rest of the afternoon hanging out. Although Patty didn't want to be filmed, she was very receptive to our project, and we had an interesting discussion later about the danger of Army recruiting in high schools. It is so much more poignant to hear a mother's take on the military. I wish she had consented to an interview. Her concern impacted me personally. By the end of the day, Patty and her brother had made us feel like family. I was reading excerpts from 100 Years of Solitude aloud in Dale's office one minute, while he explained Leonard Cohen's Borrowing from Garcia Lorca the next, with Patty walking Shaw through the stories behind the family photos lining the walls. It was after 7 p.m. before he left, the bookcomer. Our schedule had been thrown out the window, but it was just as well since everybody was probably at home thanks to a certain anti-war activist. But it was okay. There would be more cities with more prisons. We've started, and we've made friends. I think we're headed in the right direction. So, yeah, these were all published. When did I publish these? October 5th. I don't know why I put down there published. Maybe that's when I finally got them on the website. That certain war activist, I think that's MLK. So this was probably MLK Day. January 19th, 2010, Arcata. Humboldt State. We woke up early Tuesday on a dorm room floor at the Hills and Stairs University. That's what they call Humboldt State, H&S, Hills and Stairs, because there's so many hills and stairs. My original concept for the trip was for us to meet people in each city and have them invite us into their homes. It was to be a social experiment to prove the innate compassion of society. But so far, we'd only proven our own pride and timidity, sleeping a few nights in the car and once in a hostel. Luckily, I knew someone at Humboldt State, so we were good for another day. Free Wi-Fi in the city square. Settling into a cafe within reach of the free Wi-Fi blanketing downtown, I was ready to put in a little time into the website. All I knew was that I had registered a domain and signed up for a WordPress. While Shaw and I worked on another lead list, I prepared to create my blog site masterpiece. 3 hours and as many saucer-sized cups of coffee later, I still couldn't change my header or find an appropriate theme. The waiter was a great guy, though. Explained how he moved up north from Newport Beach. I talked about my family there. We commiserated over Orange County traffic. I shared a couple general curses towards technology. And we were off to wash up and learn from Arcata. One quick lesson. The police here are very friendly. You go down any one-way street in the wrong direction and almost crash headlong into a cruiser, he lets you off with a warning. Maybe it's the stash. Maybe it's the gubernatorial air I'm now exuding. Either way, thanks. Yeah, I wasn't always the best driver. I still am not the best driver, but I wasn't always the best either. Transient lifestyle. We planned to hit up the city hall, but wanted to find a bathroom first. We had rushed off campus early that morning without washing up. It's funny the things you don't notice until you're in need. After a pit stop at a gas station, we found ourselves down the street from the Arcata Chamber of Commerce. So we decided to stop by for some quick info. Bill was really helpful in giving us a background on Humboldt County, including giving us a lead on explaining where the increase in homeless originated. So some of this, he talked about how Reagan really started the homeless boom by cutting back our services for the mental health in California. More of the small government rollbacks, but at a social cost. Privatized profits, socialized costs. Our dealing with the mentally ill is one of those examples. The war falls into that pattern. Privatizing the spoils of war, socializing the cost through getting our young men and women to die from the Midwest and from these poor towns. How is that not cannibalizing the poor? 34, all right, we're going to heat up. Hurry up. After hitting the streets, after talking with Bill, we realized we probably weren't going to make it to City Hall in time. So we decided to hit the high and low ends of the real estate market instead. Driving past Arcata High School toward the wrong side of the tracks, I saw a teenager walking down the street who might have something interesting to say. He turned out to be so articulate and mature for his age, I was a little intimidated. I definitely think he came off better than me in the interview. It was getting late before we found the most expensive house on Arcata real estate market. It happened to be a large building split into rental units. Richard opened the door and invited us into the communal kitchen, where we set up shop and had an extended conversation with first him and then other residents who literally walked into filming. And that guy told us to buy Bitcoin, so I did hear about it back then. He was like, dude, get on Bitcoin. We were knocking on people's door. We would go the high and low of the real estate market. Okay, this house is for sale, and it's one of the most expensive in the city. Knock on the door. Can you talk to us? This happened to be housing students, so it shows you what their economy's like around there. Universities. Lessons learned. My biggest takeaway for the day was that people aren't easily classified. Our typical Humboldt County high school teenager didn't fit the stereotype I was expecting. I think I was trying to talk him into smoking weed. I didn't come off the best on that video. Our rich house was full of students, and the discussions revolved more around disappointment in Obama than criticisms of an opposition. The idea is to approach each city with an open mind, and we were definitely learning. Maybe we won't be the perfect travel writers, but if we stay humble and sincere, we should learn a couple things before our trip is over. So inherently, I believe in these Taoist principles, Zen principles of sincere action will correct towards the truth. Sincerity and honesty correct towards the truth. This is the way I've been saying it over these videos. I think that's a pretty good summation. January 20th, 2010, Ukiah, of Buddhas and Peacocks. We drove through Ukiah singing Willie Nelson's Mendocino County Line and looking for Buddhas. We had read about a city of 10,000 Buddhas, and it sounded interesting. We didn't find any Buddhists by the time we got there. It was a 3.5-hour drive from Arcata, but we did make some Peacock friends. As you might have noticed if you've read these entries for the last 2 days, we aren't exactly succeeding at talking to local government officials in each city. Ukiah was no different. By the time we finished chasing peacocks, it was close to 5 p.m. But I did find an interesting local blog which offered a wealth of information regarding questions I didn't even know I should be asking. For example, is the best solution to our current economic malaise simply a new deal for local economies? So that's what their local blog had that, and that was like a pretty interesting idea. New deal, but make sure it's at the very bottom of our civic structure for local economies and make sure that they're empowered so it's not another excuse to go. Because sometimes handouts are just an excuse for federal bureaucracies to increase their stranglehold on local economies. And my innate trust in the organic basis of ecologies, one of which is a political ecology, but this is just a system we can compare to other systems and glean the wisdom from one to use in the other, is that you want to improve it at the foundational level. New Deal for local economies is a good idea. The Forest Club Lounge. We ended up hanging out at a bar with both free Wi-Fi and a cigarette machine. I made conversation with an older guy, 50s, guarding some battered luggage and nursing a beer. He mentioned that he was on his way to San Francisco and then to Southern California, just waiting for a social security check. I told him we might be able to give him a lift if he didn't mind passing through Lakeport first. His eyes lit up as he described an estranged rich brother that I couldn't tell would be happy to see him, us, or not. We were interrupted by a bartender who passed by to threaten the traveler into buying another beer. He gave me his number, the traveler, and I told him I'd call him tomorrow. As Lisa and I left the bar, Shah and I left the bar for the night, we still hadn't interviewed anyone. I walked up to a girl with dreadlocks having a conversation with her boyfriend on the street. She looked through me with red eyes as her boyfriend politely said now wasn't a good time. We walked back to the car, and I spotted a sleeping bundle under the awning of a vacant storefront. Yeah, I crashed in an alley the other night, just passing through waiting for my check to come in. I'm going to sell cars in San Diego. I think that's the guy who just gave me the number at the bar. He got kicked out of the bar, had to sleep in a storefront. Saved by a burner. Luckily, we got a response to a couch surfing email just as we were consigning ourselves to another night in the car. Hillel was a really cool guy. He taught woodshop to high school kids and went to Burning Man last year. His dad was a freedom rider in the 60s, and we had a great conversation trying to challenge assumptions. My trying to discredit his benevolent king predilections, and his trying to get me to be more pragmatic. After all, idealists like me lose elections for the more deserving. Trying to pigeonhole me into the spoiler role. You guys who are all about the ideas are just like Ralph Nader. You just ruin it for the rest of us who are more cynical but more pragmatic. But I couldn't argue with his success. He had a beautiful house that he'd personally remodeled, a fulfilling, if sometimes frustrating career, a great personality, and he lived in a beautiful city. Plus, he had pulled his money out of the market before the Great Recession, reading the writing on the wall. Yeah, but he was also eyeing my girlfriend. Hillel's a little bit of a creeper. That's what I find in the Burning Man groups and the free love groups. Are cool and all, but you gotta watch your women a little bit because they're looking for swingers and they're looking for those unicorns, those girls that are just like another adventure. I could tell a little bit of unsettled energy with Hillel. And I could tell when I give it too. You don't got to do much to come off a little bit funny. He came off, but he was totally respectful. This is all my intuition. He was respectful to me and her. Just probably looked her up and down a little bit more than. And then I'm a, very. Me and her aren't like that. When we were traveling around, I wasn't like, oh, please take my girlfriend. We were very much into each other and very much on a romantic phase. And that's why Hillel, me alone, I doubt he would have let into his house. But since I had a cute girlfriend, she helped open up some doors that wouldn't have been open for me. So I appreciate him for that. In the world, is the world simply what it is? Do non-industrious have no place in it? What does it mean to be productive? And also this might be projection from my insecurity. I think some of my antagonism towards him was he was a man who had a career and a house and the nice things. And I have this girl that I'm living in my car with trying to do this trip. So I think maybe it wasn't him and maybe it was me just being like, this is a male who, or maybe he had a vibe a little bit towards her, and then that was my insecurity. It's like, oh, he has a house and he has a career, but she's that fuck you love. It's deep. We're on our passion together, and this crazy idea is only making her love me more until it became until the poverty became too much for both of us. The wet road ahead. Is the world simply what it is? Do the non-industrious have no place in it? What does it mean to be productive? It was drizzling when we left Ukiah Thursday morning. Hillel had already gone to work. Someone has to teach those kids how to build stuff, and someone has to ask the questions. At least that's what I told myself as we pulled over, sheltering my camera to photograph a bend in the river. That was my little cleverness. Is the world simply what it is? I borrowed that line from Bend in the River. Who else borrows that line? Obama's main speechwriter, Ben Rhodes, but that's a discussion for another time. January 21st, 2010, Lakeport. Shah and I flew into Lakeport around noon, in one end and out the other down Main Street. With a population of about 5,000 people, we expected it to be a small, sleepy town. It was overcast and still sprinkling, but we were on a mission, find a public servant to interview. I was wearing my Impeach Bush t-shirt, and I didn't know if it would help or hurt my cause. I picked it up from an anti-war meeting I had attended in Berkeley a couple years ago. A lady explained how her 7-year-old daughter came up with the concept. A drawing of a little red devil, or imp, a peach, and a scraggly green bush. I bought 2. I should find those emails. I wish I could get more shirts. They were really beautiful little shirts. They were cute. I don't even think there were the words impeach bush. You just have the imp, the peach, and the bush. Kelsey Creek. We picked a local coffee shop with kids running around and the owner serving coffee behind the counter. Seemed like a good place to start our day. It just so happened that a county health official stopped by for an inspection, and luckily she had an opinion to share. And then we hit the jackpot. A self-described budget geek, a deputy administrative officer for Lake County, happened to be in the coffee shop and said he'd give us a couple minutes of his time. He was dressed up in a suit. He was perfect. Young Republican nerd, but we're going to get like wonky with policy. All right, tell us about how your local municipality is awesome and how the federal government sucks, which is like libertarian-leaning Republicans, which you'll probably find in these counties, are going to really, that's where the anarchism and them like devolving of unjust authority is something that we can agree with. It was an amazing conversation, short, informative, and affirming that we were on the right track. In his view, it was a question of politicians doing the right thing. At the end of the video, and that's why I allude to the video, but I need that video to actually get that discussion, he said some cool shit. Because they avoided the recession by being fiscally responsible in their county. And he was saying that these guys have to do the right thing, basically, because we were able to not be irresponsible, but you have to have politicians who are fiscally conservative in order to do that. And that's what he was to a T, from his personality and his demeanor to like how he spoke. And he was very articulate. At the end of the video, I draw the conclusion that we incentivize corruption to the point that we're constantly making choices between human value and profit, or personal value. By the time you get to the end, you might have been a good person when you started, but what you do is who you are. He commented, perfectly well put. So I'm talking to people whose life career is politics, but just my pure idealism, and we're coming to the same solutions because it's not that complicated. I'm making up for a lot of lack of knowledge with just guessing and like just ideals, just like, well, logically, Common sense. I was common sensing my way to agreement with some people who do this for a living. Who do you serve? Before leaving Lakeport, I took this photo because it reminded me of a song I learned in church growing up. I'm subscribing to my universal Christian ethics because I guess this year I've been working on a universal spiritual ethics that isn't aligned with one religion. And if I have to use a dogma, Zen Buddhism is the least problematic out of all the ones I've run across. But back then, I'm noticing my ethics with some sort of spiritual. So I'm bringing up church growing up. After looking up the verse, I saw that they had changed it a little for the inscription. I also found another version online. In one version, wait upon is a phrasal verb meaning to serve. Who are you of use to? In the other version, they inserted the word hope, meaning expectation and desire. This seems like a rather large difference in meaning. So basically, that's my little dig at Obama and hope. And I had something going there. But regardless of ideology, if you seek out wisdom, you should be able to find it. I couldn't have framed the contrast any better. Politicians who wait for their personal good fortune instead of waiting upon their constituents. Ahead of us was an icy mountain road through a petrified forest, a mudslide that would delay us for an hour, and no idea where we were going to sleep that night. Well, some idea, and we were driving in it. But pulling out of Lakeport, we felt good. This citizen's audit might just be onto something. January 22nd, 2010, Santa Rosa. Our day in Santa Rosa started out with a Hail Mary, an email to this guy for an interview. The way I explained it to Shah, since we would be in Sonoma County for the weekend, maybe he would find some time and drop us a line if he was in town. Our trip was supposed to be about the common citizen, but a celebrity or two couldn't hurt the cause. I think that was Tom Waits. Tom Waits lives in Santa Rosa. I sent something to his publicist. Hey, we're driving through on a political thing. Tom waits for no man, especially not Shaz on his quixotic political journey. Knocking on doors. Not wanting to just hold out for a call back from Tom, Shah directed me to the rich part of town. With over 160K people, Santa Rosa has its share of non-singing millionaires. We found ourselves on a winding path, climbing higher above the city, with wrought iron gates and towering houses on either side. The address we were looking for looked vacant, which wasn't a surprise because it was listed for 3.7 millimeters. But figuring one deep pocket was as good as the next, we picked a house with a couple cars in the driveway, decided to see if anyone was home. A woman answered the door and, although demurring for an interview, suggested we talk to her husband. While waiting outside for him, she shared insights about the neighborhood. Sheep graze a hill as a green alternative to normal landscaping, and local gossip. Everyone knows that the 3.7 millimeter house is overpriced, but she's a widower with little experience in the market. Her husband, Mike, the incubator, came to the door. He runs a nonprofit that advises startups for a 20% equity cut. Not bad, Mike. He couldn't talk on camera because engaging in politics, civics, could endanger their 501k status. I reflected on this as he handed me, among other cards, his one for the Santa Rosa Chamber of Commerce. I gave him my old insurance business card. I didn't want to appear rude, so I'm on this, oh, my name is Shaz, political, blah, blah, blah. But here's my insurance card, I guess, if we're going to do this. After politely almost inviting us in for a cup of coffee, they referred us down the street to an artist who might be into our kind of thing. We knocked on his door, but I was openly intimidated by his mastiff-sized dog and the words NASDAQ on his fleece pullover. I felt myself trailing off as he quickly said no thanks and swung the heavy door shut. I'm sure we learned something in Murfield, but I wasn't sure what it was. I pulled over across from the golf course to take a picture of the street signs in case it came to me, and to capture the clouds sponging the sunset over the horizon. Beautiful line, Shaz. Unitarians. Toward the middle of the real estate market, we felt better luck, although it did take us half an hour to find someone to interview in the 300K price range. There was that guy whose wife was sick, the contractor who was in the middle of dinner, and a big shirtless man with tattoos who first asked me if I noticed his no soliciting sign and then explained his theories on protest by non-participation, with his wife expounding loudly from somewhere behind the metal screen door. We eventually found a young guy packing for a friend's wedding in Tahoe who spared us a couple minutes of his time. Late in the evening, we wandered into a church near downtown looking for a book group that Shah had read about online. We didn't find the group, but we found a Unitarian pastor who shared with me an insightful discussion on values. He said he'd joined the Unitarian Universalist congregation because back in the day they were a breath of fresh air, talking about human needs rather than who should we kill first. It was definitely an interesting church. Art exhibition on the walls, ESL flyers on the message boards, yellowtail wine set out on the tables, an interpretive dance troupe gearing up for a live practice. We were tourists in someone else's busy Friday night. Hungry tourists. And we're running out of money here. Of grandmas and colonels. I suggested pizza. Our budget couldn't really afford it, but I figured we had pulled the day out of the garbage, and it was the end of our first week. We should celebrate. Plus, any day now, this blog would be up and book money would start rolling in. Between bites, Shaw and I talked about what we learned so far this week. There was a pattern of centralization in politics and economics, bigness versus smallness. But what constituted either category? Tom was probably going to blow me off. Did that mean he was too big of a star? Shaw graciously reminded me that, in all fairness, I wasn't even on the map. She pointed out the family pictures all over the restaurant walls and the kitsch style. Colanders for light fixtures, bright primary colors. I suggested that this was clearly a chain, or at least one of many. But then In-N-Out Burger, a veritable California state treasure, has 240 locations and yet still family owned. Can you call a 450 millimeter revenue company small? Shaw thought their burgers were overrated, and the conversation digressed. Insult In-N-Out Burgers to California, and your conversation's going to digress. At this moment, I remembered an interesting anecdote regarding an explosive magazine from the Vietnam War era. They published a photo essay that turned MLK against the war, so it seemed like a good coda for the end of the week. For people who don't like clicking the links, I'll give a brief recap. A reporter is covering the Democratic National Convention and sees a Rolls Royce pull up. Out steps an old man with a cane. The old man tips the shoeshine boys. The old man is Colonel Sanders. When showing up to the political convention in a Rolls Royce and tipping the shoeshine boys, when you have the gravity to disproportionately affect society around you, maybe that's when you're big. Is there such a thing as a world within which many worlds fit? That's the Zapatista line from Marcos. Is it as simple, I'd read those books too by then, is it as simple as getting people involved, creating that space for ourselves? Whatever the next step is, I'm going to a friend's house in San Francisco to think it over for the weekend. Because if there's one place that Shaw and I don't fit well, it's in the back of a Honda Civic. The road is starting to get to us. January 25th, 2010, Yuba City. If you click on the Yuba City wiki link, you'll find a couple interesting facts. Sunsweet Inc., the largest dried fruit processing plant in the world, is headquartered there. Yuba is home to one of the largest Sikh communities outside of the Punjab state of India. On March 14th, 1961, a B-52 Stratofortress carrying nuclear weapons crashed near the city. 2 thermonuclear bombs were destroyed on impact without exploding or releasing radioactive material. So we had a couple options: fruit, Sikhs, or nukes. We were hungry and heard the Sikhs offer free food, so we headed to the temple first. God, work, and charity. Shaw and I are not the most cultured travelers, and admittedly we had no idea what to do inside a Sikh temple. As we removed our shoes and Shaw wrapped her head, per written instructions on the entrance wall, we ran into an older couple exiting the main room. There was a definite communication gap, but after much smiling and some bowing, they poured a fragrant flower nut mixture into our cupped hands. We carried this into the main carpeted room and almost deposited it into the offering box before being intercepted by an attendant who led us into the kitchen. Here we found out that the flour and nuts were for eating, not offering, and we experienced firsthand one of the 3 tenets of Sikhism, charity. The man offered us heaping portions of food we couldn't refuse, and then called the cleric and scheduled us an interview for the following day. The next day, the cleric filled us in on the 2 other tenets: believe in God and be industrious. He played soccer in college, left out position, and had been accepted to join the police in India. But a saint he followed told him to serve God instead. He applied for a U.S. visa in 91 and has been here working with the various temples ever since. He was very generous with his time, even though we were late, and after the interview he sat down and had a more intimate conversation over tea. Some of the comments that struck me. Man is measured by his good deeds, not by age. The oak leads a long life, but we value the lily. God created man, man created religion. All are paths to the same goal. This is a type of humility and wisdom that endears me to people of faith and gives me hope that religion isn't all that bad. Mortgage or marriage? Our second interview in Yuba City was an accident. Shaw and I were trying to avoid another night in the car by calling Craigslist ads and asking people who were renting out rooms if they'd let us stay for the night. It was a long shot, but one lady was kind enough to at least consent to an interview the next day. Tisha and John were gracious enough to invite us into their home and give us a couple hours of their time. You can see in the interview that it was just an honest conversation about a couple discussing things they are dealing with in this recession economy. John lets Tisha describe their hardships and stresses on their marriage, but he later chokes up when describing what friendship meant to him. A friend driving hours in the middle of the night to help him winch his truck out of the mud. No questions asked. Later he shows me the office with assorted NASCAR memorabilia. He describes how his stepdaughter is also a fan. I told her someone gave me tickets and she says, "I'll take the day off. You know how you can't go without me." She's going to college. He's been laid off, but they might bring him back if there's work. They let him still keep his company truck. Otherwise, the family would just be down to one vehicle, one minivan. John is selling the Thunderbird for $1,500. In a better time, he might have gotten $4,500, pictured above. The dirt bike is going too. I bring up safety nets, 401k, etc. He said they had one at work, but he pulled his money out a long time ago. He wanted to put it in more safe investments, but ran into problems and just stopped participating. Panhandling. We didn't have time left in Yuba City to poke around for fruits or nukes, but I think we learned something about values in society. Maybe government shouldn't be run like a religion, where you hold charity as a main principle. And maybe we don't have to in a society as diverse and giving as ours. But then we shouldn't ignore hardworking people who need a break, perhaps more so than the banking industry. The bailout wasn't the only solution available. Perhaps there is still the Wild West, every panhandler for himself. Perhaps this is still the Wild West. But how much control does the average citizen have over these capital markets? How much control do we have over any large institution that can make or break our economy? I think of this as we drive past naked trees lined up in rows like soldiers waiting for orders. Maybe things become too big when the people are forgotten. I might have to do another. I'm going to do another video. All right, we're going to stop this one. We're going to do another one. I talked too much, bullshitted too much at the beginning of this. We're going to finish this one today, even though it's dark. So stopping, and we're going to start the next one January 26, 2010. Colusa.